Hi, it's Kibun. Today, let's talk about the podcast with Pritam Singh. And you heard that right. This was his first long form interview with any podcaster, as far as I know. And it's not with any Singapore podcast like the Daily Ketchup or Yalabat. But that said, the interview was in Malaysia, done by a Malaysian podcaster, packed with insights and received the response from the PAP. And we're going to go into all of that drama in the next 10 minutes or so. So let's get right into it. So I read the 600 words that was published by Petir, and this is the PAP online blog if you haven't heard of it. I also linked it in the description. So let's break it down. The article questioned why Pritam gave an interview to a Malaysian podcast, which I think is a fair question, and we'll get into that. And it spent more than half the article talking about the past, which I'm going to ignore. It then answered a question that they didn't ask, which was very confusing for me. So I did not see Petir mentioning any specifics from Pritam's interview that had any kind of wrongdoing. And last I checked, giving an interview to a foreign podcaster is not a crime. So that in itself should not and cannot be an indictment. Otherwise, I could also say that our ministers having dinner with foreign actors. Okay, let's not get into that, but you get the idea. Now, Pritam Singh said something in his interview that gave me food for thought.
There's a perception, both outside and I suppose inside Singapore as well. I've spent enough time in Singapore to know this, that somebody who joins an opposition party, somebody who chooses to be active in a political party other than the PAP, has to be prepared to make some personal sacrifices.
I think to a large extent that is true. I don't think one can suggest that being in the opposition or deciding to bat for the opposition team doesn't come with significant, did I do the right thing? Could I have done something else? I don't suggest that it's a simple choice, and which is why I'm quite sympathetic to my colleagues in the opposition, regardless of party, who decide to put their name on the ballot and run, because it's not an easy decision. I think you're under a lot of public scrutiny. I've continued to have people who come and see me and say, I'm afraid my company may not get contracts from the government, for example.
Sure.
Those sort of concerns.
Yeah.
I mean, people do verbalize them.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody will stand up and say, yeah, that's really going to be a problem, because you don't know. But of course, these things work on your mind, right? I mean, it's just only human to feel that way.
So politics is a dirty game. Being a politician means putting yourself out there for public scrutiny, and I respect anyone who puts themselves forward for politics, because it means subjecting yourself to pain in order to advance Singapore's interests, no matter whether you're from PAP, Workers' Party, or any of the alternatives, even the so-called mosquito parties. Because if their candidates didn't put themselves forward, pockets of Singaporeans would not have gotten the vote. The incumbent could have channeled additional resources from uncontested constituencies to the key battlegrounds, which could stifle a healthy democracy. So I respect people who put themselves forward, which is why I find it hard to take criticism seriously when it's delivered in long paragraphs with no name, no face, just a bunch of words attributed to no human being. I mean, imagine this video. If it didn't have my face, just some voice coming out of your phone, your TV, telling you what I think, would you take me seriously? I just find the whole Petir article lacking in conviction in its current form. But that said, its poor form does not mean that they were wrong. I think Pritam Singh's choice was still odd. Choosing a Malaysian podcast is odd. And to also do the interview while on vacation with his family in Malaysia made it even more peculiar and suggests a certain calculus to it. So let's dig into that. I think politicians go on podcasts for many reasons. And it's not really a secret that many politicians went on Daily Ketchup, Yalabat, so that they don't appear like.
咁難怪嘅，部長佢高高在上，邊度會了解到人民個生活困難呢？
I think many times I find this sort of interviews to be 20% hardware, talking about the party's talking points, singing a corporate song, while 80% is hardware. And that's how our earbuds collectively suffered through G 2025 with renditions such as. There is one that knows everything I see. Not a cloud in the sky, got the sun in my eye. But I won't be surprised if it's a dream. Now, some politicians may be less known, so they went on podcasts to make themselves known to Singaporeans. and others may have specific stories and messages to Singaporeans. And as I listened to Pritam Singh, I realized that across the 1 hour to 50 minutes, he said a lot of things. But I thought the key thing he was trying to do is to seed several WP narratives. Let's think about it. Communications is really about reach and engagement. Choosing a Malaysian podcast, and this podcast is no joke in Malaysia, yeah? It's one of the most popular, with almost 400k subscribers, and is hosted by two former UMNO members that were dismissed from the party. Their main host is a former health minister who took the country through the COVID-19 pandemic. But if you talk about reach, I think most Singaporeans have no idea who they are or if they even exist. Now, if we talk about engagement, I think that's where the secret sauce is. So no matter how open our local podcasters are, there is a limit to what we can discuss, whether in reality or perceived. I'll give you a personal example. When I first started this podcast, I did a number of live streams with my friend David Lee discussing how stupid Donald Trump policy and his presidency started. If you watch my podcast for a while now, when was the last time you heard me use the word stupid to describe any of our politicians? So when something hits closer to home, it is that much harder to discuss without Singaporeans being offended. And offending people in itself is not an issue for me, but angry people are not receptive to ideas. And I'm not willing to throw away civil discourse by making people angry. So I actually appreciated that it was a third party, so to speak, that could act as a conduit for Pritam Singh to discuss some of the serious topics in Singapore's politics. So for that, I thought his choice to go with a Malaysian podcaster made sense. I mean, imagine one of our local podcasters saying this.
And this is what we remind Singaporeans about constantly. Would you prefer Singapore without an opposition presence? And the answer is no.
Yeah, I can imagine what a PAP response might be, saying that this is the height of political theatre. It only proves how fast you can think of pithy one-liners and not consider debate in the House. I'm not asking to answer. I'm answering on your behalf.
I can see a PAP politician saying that.
Or even this.
Can you ever see Singapore without the PAP in the driving seat?
Well, even Lee Kuan Yew could see a Singapore without the PAP in the driving seat. He has been on record to say, there may well come a time where
it's fear-mongering.
I cannot speak for other podcasters. I'm not sure that I'm prepared to directly call a spade all the time. That said though, I also felt that our local political podcast scene is in a nascent stage. Most of our big podcasters do politics as one of many things. I don't really see many people doing what Plan B or even Red Dot Perspective do and cover politics as a mainstay. And I speak for myself to say that I don't think I can be so clever to offer that high quality commentaries that I saw in Pritam's interview. But no one started off awesome. Practice makes perfect. So I'm quietly disappointed that Pritam did not take the opportunity to help the local podcast scene hone our skills. But he did kind of pseudo-promise Yalabat that he was going to do an interview with them, so there may be hope yet. Alright, I also want to talk about some of his key messages. I think this interview was one of the clearest articulation of how the Workers' Party sees themselves.
You and I can have different views about anything under the sun, but ultimately one view will prevail. And I think that's the view that the public can relate to most naturally. And hence, in comparison to the other opposition parties, we present this particular vision for this moment in time. And if it changes or if it has to change, we want to be in a position to pivot very quickly. But you can't pivot or you can't talk about change if you're not in the game. And so you've got to at least have a position in Parliament which is reflective of the ethos, the mood of the times, to be able to present the views that the public want presented in Parliament.
I used to agree with this 100%. Now I agree with it 99%. Honestly, if you're not in Parliament, your voice does not matter. But here's the caveat. Why does it not matter? I think some of the time it is because Singaporeans are not talking about an issue. Many discussions regress into complaints, and the conversations end up talking themselves to nowhere. Now, if those conversations are crystallized and directly referencing policies and law, would those voices matter more? So why else would it not matter? Oh, well, because sometimes we're just one voice when we speak. Now, I'm a small YouTuber talking politics and social issues. My videos get 3 to 10,000 views? I mean, that's peanuts, right? But what if someone more charismatic, someone smarter came along and is able to do what I do, but 10 times, 20 times better? Imagine talking about the cyclist ban on pedestrian-only pathways, the same video but with a reach of 100,000, 200,000 viewers. Would you say that his or her voice would actually matter more? So it is not so much that you don't matter if you're not in parliament. There are alternative paths to having the same effect, but they require hard work, consistency, and a little good looks and charm. Hard but not impossible. Which is why I keep doing what I do, trying to keep talking the issues so that others will also do the same. And I hope that someday we all of us can be big enough as a community for our voices to be heard, or that someone with star power can be that YouTuber to be an alternative voice for the people, even outside of parliament. Now, Pritam also talked about recognizing what people wanted.
What is the psyche of the average Singaporean? Very pragmatic people, actually. What are the outcomes? Are the outcomes good outcomes? And if the outcomes are good, then it comes back to the point that I made earlier. The opposition has a very difficult job. How do you bring forward this vision of a participatory democracy, a more balanced political system, when we've probably got some of the best public libraries in the world, a very, very highly regarded public housing system? It has its issues with costs, and we can talk about that in time. But generally, I mean, on a day-to-day level, it's okay lah. It's a pretty decent place to live, to thrive, to grow, to raise your family, and that's not what we are trying to destroy.
So I thought that this recognition is so important. Singaporeans want opposition to be a check and balance, and I think it makes sense. I agree with Pritam's characterization of why Singaporeans think this is necessary.
And I think if somebody presents a very radically different vision of Singapore, they're going to have to deal with these fundamental questions about, look, it's running well. Why are you trying to break something which is going fine? But in spite of all that, there is a desire amongst many Singaporeans for political balance, and we know that. And we try and tap into that. And we present a platform, a vision to the public to say that, look, we believe we can fulfill that aspiration that you have. That's where Singapore politics is. I mean, I heard comments that Kyrie, yourself, and Charlie, you made, and you exchanged in the aftermath of our elections. And I can understand the perception, you don't want to be government. So what is this about? And it's a fair point from an observer perspective. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But then you add the overlay of the Singaporean voter and what he or she wants. If we want an opposition, but we still feel the opposition should play a check and balance role. That's what we want. And if you go in there with an argument that we're ready to form government, but that doesn't sync and gel with the emotions on the ground, I don't think that's going to be a recipe for a successful political campaign.
And I think Singaporeans do not want regime change. So that means they do not want the opposition to win more than 50% of parliament. So if you're not aware, Singapore follows a Westminster system. So whichever political party with more than half of the MP seats becomes the government. So remember 2025, we got 97 MPs. So because PAP has more than 49 MPs, they form the government and they get to decide who becomes a prime minister. So when the interview came to this topic of prime minister,
You want to be Prime Minister of Singapore?
No.
Why?
So, we all have a role in our minds and in our heart of hearts. And I think my role is to normalize the idea of an opposition in Singapore. That's my role. And I hope to be able to bring more like-minded people on board. So being a Singaporean and being in a Singapore which has a functioning and effective parliamentary democracy is my life mission. And that's how I see my role.
So Pritam did not even hesitate to say he does not want to be PM. I'm sure it pains the opposition to hear that the leader of the opposition does not intend to become government, but that is realistic, and more importantly, what Singaporeans currently want. Maybe that will change in the future, but not now. And Pritam actually went on to quantify his view of checks and balances in terms of MP numbers. And the magic number is 33%, so around 32 MPs. Again, quick education on an electoral system. The Westminster system is designed such that the government can decisively govern. So PAP has the majority so they can pass laws as they please. But for more serious laws, constitutional ones, they need two-thirds majority. That is why Pritam often speaks of the medium-term goal of getting 33% of parliament, including in his interview, so that they have a say in the serious stuff and a voice with some bite. To be honest, I'm not convinced that Singaporeans are looking at 33%. I mean, look at 2011. When it looks like the opposition was going to be washed up in a white PAP wave, Singaporeans voted WP to the first GRC. In 2015, it looks like the opposition could sweep and Singaporeans voted the other way. Then in 2020, again, the pendulum swung to PAP and the people voted WP to a second GRC to keep the balance. So that tells me that Singaporeans could be quite satisfied with opposition presence of around 10 MPs. Too much, they get worried that the upset could mean regime change. Too little, not enough checks and balance. Honestly, I don't know what the magic number is, and no one really will, so we can only guess from these anecdotes. Now, the last thing I'll say about Pritam's interview is this. Remember what I said about the challenge for local podcasters earlier? Now, in many ways, Pritam and the WP face the same issues. If they said certain things directly, like wanting to be Prime Minister or next government, it could scare Singaporeans. So when people are scared, they are less likely to want to listen, even if what you say makes absolute sense. Just think about the last time you argued with your spouse, boyfriend, or girlfriend. So people hear what they want to hear. So by taking a more tempered approach in his messaging, by definitively saying that he does not want to be PM, people, and I don't mean hardcore WP and opposition guys, I'm talking swing voters, they may be more willing to hear Pritam Singh out. And I thought Pritam was cunning to weave in a new idea. In the past, Mr. Lotakyang talked about the WP being a co-driver. In the interview, Pritam said that WP is an insurance plan for if PAP failed. Not when, but if. This kind of message is so on brand with everything that Pritam has communicated over the years. They're not trying to take over, they're just here to make things better. And hey, they're also a backup if shit hits the fan. And that positioning, that messaging, I thought was pretty clever and only achievable because they are playing within the confines of what Singaporeans want and are receptive to listening. What started as something odd started to sound like really clever stratagem by Pritam as I talk about it. And with that, I have the full interview linked in the description if you want to check it out. Let me know what you think about what Pritam said and how he went about it. I'm looking forward to discussing this in the comment section. And until next time, I'll see you all at our Red Dot Perspective.